And now, without further ado, Melissa Scholes Young is the author of of the novels The Hive, which we'll be discussing tonight, and Flood, editor of Grace in Darkness and Fierce Gravity, two anthologies of new writing in DC by women writers. She's a contributing editor at Fiction Writers Review, and her work has appeared in The Atlantic, Washington Post, Poet Writers, Ploughshares, Literary Hub, and many, many other places. And I'm just going to keep it short because it's all, you can find that elsewhere. Melissa, this is a fantastic book, and please read us a few minutes of it.
Amy, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Amy's family for showing up tonight. That's the most important thing. I'm grateful to you and Zach, the Writer Center, for inviting me, but also for really holding space for all writers in our community during a difficult time for writers and for artists. And so it matters to have a place like the Writer Center. And I'm honored to be with you. It is amazing to see so many folks from near and far, so many friends from the past and the present and the future. So I'm gonna share with you a bit about the Hive, and then read you just a few opening pages, just to place you a bit. The Hive. Oh, I do have it. It's right here. These are advanced reader copies. Aren't they pretty? I know, it's so exciting. Listen, if anyone ever tells you that writing a book and getting a copy of it that's print isn't amazing, they're lying. It's amazing. So to have the ARC and to have it and to hold it and to be a month from publication is super exciting. And it's very exciting to be able to talk about it for the first time tonight at the Writer Center. So The Hive is it's a story about class in America and the fates of four sisters and their family in a family business in a really politically divided Midwestern town. And I think that that's very timely for those of us paying attention. So I'm going to read you a bit from the prologue. Feller Sisters. It was mid-July on a sweltering Missouri afternoon, and the sun couldn't find a single cloud to hide behind. Waterfowl ducked beneath the river surface, and the whippoorwills sang their melancholy from lush trees waving above. The stale air stank of soil and algae mixed with coconut sunscreen. The muddy water of the Mississippi River wasn't worried with the Feller family's survival, but the sisters were. Sunshine baked the wooden dock and kissed the Feller sisters' freckles. Just as they had the summer before and the one before that one too, the sisters wore bikinis, faded tops and bottoms passed down and among them. The river assaulted the elastic, and the blistering light faded the floral colors, but still the camp swimmer endured. It came too close for me, Tammy said, dangling her legs off the dock. We almost lost everything. She flexed her feet in the sticky air. A rotten piece of debris hung from her pinky toe. Tammy shook it off, and the current swept it away. Everything that mattered anyway. It was never that close, Maggie insisted. She swatted a mosquito on Tammy's thigh, leaving a thin trail of crimson bug blood. Besides, nobody would want this old fishing camp. It's a mess. But it's our mess, Kate said, looking up and down her row of sisters. It was too close for Mom, Jules added. She was itching to be done with it all. The family business and the business of the family, all of it. At least we're still together, Maggie said. That's what Dad cared about. Sipping green glass bottles of soda, the sisters agreed, but they'd never know the true feelings of their father. 1 year ago, they'd sat on the same dock, months before their family broke, and they were left with only the fragments of the whole they'd once been. Now they were making their first camp trip solo as sisters. They were still sorting out who brought what and how the family worked now. Jules dove into the brown water alone and waded her way back up. Maggie and Tammy held hands, nudging each other's hips, and jumped off the dock together. Kate ran at her sisters, waited in vain for her parents to call after them, and then belly flopped in the middle of their wake with a splash. The Feller family fish camp had been handed down for 3 generations, a burden both beloved and neglected. It was a simple single-wide trailer on stilts, with rusted panels that had maybe once been painted white. The camp sat at the meeting of the mighty Mississippi and the Ohio River on the lap of Fort Defiance Park. Robbie, their dad, liked to remind them all that it was once called Camp Defiance during the Civil War and had been commanded by General Ulysses S. Grant. Jules would roll her eyes and tell him that glorifying a war fought for slavery was oppressive. Before they began bantering about erasing history versus righting historical wrongs, Grace, their mother, would hold up her hands and say, enough. By the time they loaded the car for these trips, Grace had made dozens of decisions. She sought a truce, even if it wouldn't hold. The trailer's living room and kitchen combination reeked of rancid catfish and bitter beer. The 2 miniature bedrooms housed 4 sets of built-in bunk beds with narrow strips of peeling, dingy vinyl between the lofts. The Fellers ran to camp most weekends and squeezed in a few fall trips before the chill air arrived and the leaves crisped in the Missouri Valley. At the camp, the sisters learned to bait hooks, pull fish traps from the muck, and dig burrs out of their bare feet. They knew which bunks were theirs because they'd carved their names in the frame as a tradition on their 5th birthdays. On their annual inaugural trip, as spring rounded the corner to summer, Grace cut notches in the wooden stairs to measure her daughter's growth. She added initials and the date while the sisters raced ahead and peeled off Catholic school uniforms and pulled on matching swimsuit pieces from a communal wicker basket before jumping off the dock into the cool relief of the muddy water. The family dog chased them, cautioning their courage with a bark and cheering on their unleashed animal freedom. The promise of the camp brought hope. It lifted the family's spirits to pile in the car after the last day of school and travel toward the water. Each trip, the Feller family wished they would roast marshmallows for s'mores and finally catch fireflies without fighting over which sister had more. They would leave the family pest control business behind and not talk about how to cover the quarterly tax bill or whether they should pay for the employees' cell phones. But first, they had to drive the 46 miles from Cape Girardeau, Missouri to Cairo, Illinois, snaking the Mississippi River's gritty coast to put in the boat. Each trip, Robbie insisted they coordinate bathroom breaks for the drive, but they had to stop at least twice. Even as they grew from children to teens to young adults, their trips were the same. Maggie would say they should have checked the road conditions. Jules got car sick. Someone else would say planning took away from the adventure, probably Tammy. Kate didn't say much. She was lost in her own thoughts and passed around their mom's latest creation of homemade granola bars. Their brindle pit bull Nacho would whine from the back seat and lick their hands for crumbs. Robbie promised that if they could all hold it, they would be cooking hot dogs over a fire in time for supper, but they usually settled for grilled cheese sandwiches on the dock as the sun set. Nacho ran after the bunnies in the bushes, hoping to find his own dinner, relieved to be released from the car. Who knew which family camp trip would be the one they'd remember the most? The pieces of the weekends and years might add up to an entirely different story. Maybe they'd each remember separate parts, or the same ones in different patterns. Perhaps as grief and joy intersected, they'd learn that the whole mattered more than the portions. Nacho could have told them that. Dogs know that the only moment that matters is the one you're living. I'll pause there. I can see you all clapping, but normally I could hear you all clapping.
I was just mesmerized.
I can feel the energy though.
So what we're going to do here, we're going to talk less about what Melissa wrote and more about how she wrote it. But if you want an advanced reader copy, throw into the chat right now. Your favorite indie bookstore, the name of your favorite indie bookstore from which you are about to buy a copy of this book. And Zach is going to randomly choose a winner. And even if you win the advanced reader copy, you should still buy a copy after that.
Listen, Amy, if they buy a copy and they go to thehivenovel.com and let me know, I will send them a pre-order incentive. I will write them a postcard, artist design postcard, bookmarks. I've even got honey masks because who does not need some pampering right now?
I got one of those. It was a nice surprise. Okay, so I'm going to ask you about the way you come up with an idea, and then I want to move to your research. So when you start a novel, how fully formed is the idea? Do you start with a plot, a character, a theme? How did you get from doomsday prepping to that? Or actually, I don't know if that was your starting point.
Well, it's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very good at questions, Amy. You're a very good reader. I usually begin actually with a question. It's not a character, it's not an idea, it's a question, something I can't figure out in my own mind. So for the Hive, one of the questions was, what's the line between preparedness and paranoia. So specifically, as Amy mentioned, I was studying preppers movement and asking how members like Grace, the mother in the hive, balance their fears about the future with daily living.
Excuse me, can you explain what a prepper is?
A prepper is a person who is preparing for a natural disaster, maybe an apocalypse, maybe a hurricane, but they're preparing in a way that they assume that the world will not be the same after the event. So it could be an electromagnetic pulse, it could be Hurricane Sandy, it could be the Mississippi River flooding, or it can be an actual apocalypse with zombies. You just don't know. So that's what a prepper is. And Grace in the novel is a prepper. And part of the book is her own journey, figuring out how much she's worrying and maybe missing some of the joy, right? Like how far will you go to take from or harm someone else to save your own? That's one of the for me, that was one of the big questions that I started the book with. I was also asking big questions about sudden grief. So what does it mean to sort out and reorder a life when someone suddenly dies? The beloved patriarch, and this is all in the back of the book, I'm not giving anything away, but the beloved patriarch Robbie has a lot of work to do in the hive, but he also has to die in the first part of the story to create space for the family to reorganize their structure. So in my drafting, when I start a new book, I'm drafting toward the answers to those questions, and I don't know them, which is what makes it so exciting and fun to write for me.
But okay, so an interest in doomsday prepping and sudden death are not necessarily everybody's idea of, woven together. How did that happen?
That's another great question. For whatever reason, I have decided before I start writing a new book that I have to have three things. And I always have to have the setting, and it has to be interesting to me in a new way. And I also have to have at least two questions that are driving me. The grief was one question. And then of course the line between preparedness and paranoia, and the way in which grief is so profound in reorganizing who we are. And I don't know why I settled on three things. I just have to be so interested in the book before I'm willing to sit down and really devote, 5 years to drafting.
Rule of three.
It seems to work for me.
So, your research process is meticulous, and when you read The Hive, after you buy the book from your indie bookstore, and you get into the head of Grace, it's told in multiple points of view, but Grace, the mother, who's a doomsday prepper, which for many of us is not a mind space with which we're familiar. I know you're an avid researcher, but how does that work? So you decided you wanted to think about doomsday prepping. How much did you need to know before you started to write, or did you start to write and then find where the holes were?
I grew up in the country in rural Missouri, and what many people call prepping was just survival. When you live without a lot of resources and you grow your own food and you are living 20, 30 miles from a store, you learn to keep stock, right? You don't grocery shop every day. If you want something fresh, it's in your garden. And that way of life didn't seem quite as foreign to me. And then this show, Amy mentioned the show Doomsday Preppers, which is so far from reality, right? Was interesting to me. And I started doing a lot of research on it. I started trying to understand the mindset of Grace in particular. And I think research is a really fantastic way to feel like you're writing when you're not really writing, right? It's a way to sort of avoid the hard work. But I think research also helps me draw some really authentic characters. So part of my work in trying to understand Grace was going to a survivalist, to a place called Prepper Camp. And even as a fiction writer, I can't make this stuff up. This is a 3-day wilderness survival skill building workshop that's in rural North Carolina. And I went to 3 different prepper camps. 2 of them really turned out to be more like gun shows, which was very different than the survivalist aspect of it. And I was really trying to understand who Grace was. And I found her there. I came in with expectations and answers, and I found out very quickly that I was very wrong. I went thinking it was going to be this gun show, and it really turned out to be much closer to like a hippie camp. And the Feller family that I wrote about in the Hive would fit in very well. In fact, I actually took my own parents to prepper camp. And I was very clear going in, like, I'm going in for novel research, and you are probably here as actual preppers. And they just said, as long as you don't write about us, that's fine. And we had a really lovely weekend exploring skill sets. And that's really what prepper camp is about. In one workshop, we walked through the forest, and they taught us what we could eat. I learned about beekeeping and composting and solar energy, which sounded on a further range of the spectrum of political division than I was expecting. I was surprised by what I learned there. And one of the most profound moments, the moment where I sort of understood Grace, this character, the most, was they put up this picture of what looked like Rambo, right? He's got the ammo and the guns, and the first thing they said was, this is in the apocalypse, this is actually the first guy that dies. You're wearing all your assets, you're wearing everything on your body, and this is not a person that's going to survive the apocalypse. And I found that a relief. It was a good lesson to learn. And I think it's the difference between a hobbyist who wants to boast about kind of a consumerism, and a survivalist who wants to live more in conjunction with the land. So I was interested in that tension with Grace, and a lot of my research has to be in person.
So how much of the research, because this is these characters, we'll get into multiple points of view. There are 5 points of view. I think what the mother and 4 daughters each have their own voices, and I think there was a question. All right, I'll get to the chat after, because I'm not that good at right. So how do you know when you're finished researching and ready to write? Do you have to go back and research more when you find holes? And does what you find when you research influence your story?
Yes to both. What I find when I'm researching definitely influences my story. And I do use research to fill in holes when I get stuck. And sometimes I just use research to do what I call wandering curiously. Like, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but I would like to understand different types of ammunition or different types of things in the insect world. So a lot of my research actually had to do with bed bugs and cicadas and this idea of what a pest control business. I grew up in a pest control business, but that is not the same as understanding the insect world. And so I spent a lot of time reading pest control magazines and learning the science of bees and bed bugs and methods for managing them without chemicals. And so a lot of my research took me in that direction too. But you're right, those were places in which my research had to start filling in holes so that I could write characters who were, sometimes had different experiences and were more knowledgeable than I was.
So I'm going to take a moment to announce the winner before I forget. The winner, hang on. Zach just texted me. No, I lost it. Okay, the raffle winner is Karen Martinez, recommending Bard's Alley in Vienna, Virginia. Send an email, send Zach a direct message, and we will figure out how to get you your copy. Awesome. All right, so congratulations, and message me later and let me know how much you love the book.
Bard's Alley, I would highly recommend Bard's Alley too. They have the sweetest little bookstore, a really lovely wine bar, amazing events. I love all the independent bookstores, but that one in particular is pretty special. Let's talk points of view. So you have 5 points of view. Interesting choice. And they all sound different. I mean, you can, even if you don't see the heading of who's speaking, you can pick it up and know who's who. How on God's green earth did you manage that? It's fun to hear from readers who love certain point of views better than others. And everyone loves Grace. Everyone's responding to Grace, but you're right. There's 4 sisters, and it's really a story about the sisters, right? And their own survival. And I had to write each of them separately. And so it was really my second or my third full draft of the manuscript that I rewrote each of the point of views from start to finish. And that was so that I could really maintain their distinct voices. So I actually physically printed out the manuscript and then pulled each of the point of views out and made 5 separate piles. And then I rewrote the entire point of view from that, just so I could stay in that voice for each different character. And then I wove them back together in another revision and considered how Robbie's death, the patriarch's death, would have impacted each of them individually, and then how it altered their relationship to each other in the hive. So it's really like writing 5 separate novels, and I do not recommend this at all.
So how many drafts was this, Melissa?
You know me, Amy. I write a lot of drafts. I have in one of these cabinets down here 8 full printed drafts. I don't think that includes copy edits, because once you get into the publishing pipeline, you get a lot of edits as well. But I will say it was 8 full drafts with a lot of mistakes. I mean, I think the writing process is also about going sometimes in the wrong direction to recalibrate and figure things out.
All right, there are, I think the technical word is a crap ton of questions coming in, and I have so many that I want to ask, but this is not about me. Gosh darn it. All right, I'm going to ask one more that I would like to hear, to which I would like to hear your answer, and then I'll go to the chat. So, okay, you published Flood through Hachette. Big 4, is it 4 now?
4.5, we're calling it at the moment,
right.
But you have
Big
to check
4.
the notes every day.
4.5. Publishing houses, and what made you decide to go with Turner, a smaller press, for the Hive? And can you discuss a little bit about the experience with each for those of us who, I don't know, haven't done either?
You will soon, Amy. Amy's written an incredible novel. They're all different experiences, and I have been honored, and I feel really lucky. I feel very pleased with the results, but you're right, they've been very, very different things. I published a chapbook last year with called Scrap Metal Baby, with a brand new micro independent press called Summer Camp Publishing. And I'm a huge fan. The editor, Brooks Rexroth, took so much care with my work. And that's really what I'm looking for when I make a decision, is who's enthusiastic about it, who gets my story and my characters in a way that will help that story reach readers the most. As you mentioned, my first novel, Flood, came out Hachette, big, huge 5 publishers. Turner was a different decision, and I am thrilled so far. Large, independent, and a new imprint called Keylight, and I was super excited about their vision of featuring books that can immediately be turned to the screen. So knowing the Feller sisters, knowing the Feller family, and how much I would love to see rural voices and authentic portrayals of rural culture on the screen, this was very inviting to me. The film rights were optioned to Sony about 30 minutes after I actually signed the book deal. And the audio rights were immediately sold to Dreamscape. It was a dream come true, and it has been so far. I've also edited, which Amy's been a part of, and many of the audience members, or so many of you, have been a part of Furious Gravity and Grace and Darkness. And I wanted also to go independent. I wanted it to be more of a cooperative relationship. So I set up a partnership between American University, where I teach, and Politics and Prose, which is one of our biggest independent bookstores in DC. I like to mix it up. I like to work with big, and I like to work with medium, and I like to work with small. I'm really looking for an editor and a team that are enthusiastic about my book. And the Hive has had an absolute dream team, between the marketing team at Turner, my independent publicist, Lauren Sarand, who is a dream come true, a team that's at American University supporting the book too, and really the community. It's just, to me, it's everything I ever wanted in being a literary citizen, but also in being a writer in a place like DC. So a wide range of experiences. I don't know that I can recommend one over another, but I think you do learn a great deal I've learned something from each of those editors.
All right, I am going to the chat, and I'm thinking of extending this discussion to 6 or 7 hours. So everybody
here.
settle in. Everybody
here.
settle in.
Anything
Okay.
not to have to make dinner. I'm here.
Okay. Okay. Question to the author. Melissa wrote this novel from an amazing 5 points of view. Curious, which point of view was the most challenging to write from?
So that's a great question. I think Grace was the most fun. She kept surprising me. I love a ambivalent mother. I really, really love ambivalence about motherhood. Jules was the character that was the hardest actually to write because of her own mental health struggles.
Who was Jules?
Jules is the second born daughter. Maggie's the oldest, and Maggie wants to take over the family business. She's been in charge of it and really groomed to do so because the Feller family don't have a son, which is how a family business would normally be handed over based on the bloodline, but that doesn't exist for the Fellers. And so Maggie's the oldest. Jules is the second born. She's a first generation college student at the University of Missouri, and she's an artist. She's also struggling a great deal with her own identity and her own mental health struggles. So Jules was the most authentic and challenging to write. And then there's two other sisters. Tammy is the 16-year-old, and she was a hoot to write. She wants to be Miss Cape Girardeau, and I love a good pageant. I love a good beauty pageant. That is really fun stuff to write. And then Kate is the baby of the family, and she's the one who's also figuring out her own identity, her own desires, but she's on a spiritual journey of her own. So they were all really fun to write, but very challenging in different ways.
And I just want to point out that Melissa has no sisters. So
I do not have sisters, but I clearly wanted one.
Well, you've got all of us. So.
I know. I've clearly tried to collect as many sisters as I can in DC to be my sisters. And I also do have daughters. And so I was very interested in that bond. I grew up with a bunch of brothers. And so it's a different relationship. So I did give early drafts of the Hive to my daughters, and they had plenty to say.
Daughters often do.
God bless them.
So a question from Julia. How do you avoid getting stuck in a perpetual rabbit hole when you're researching? How do you know where the line between research that serves a project and research that is just fascinating and interesting, but not necessarily useful to the book? And a follow-up from Kat was a similar question. When do you know it's time to move from questioning and researching to drafting? Or also I know this is a typo, but I want to highlight it because I love it. Do you create an outline, or are you a panther?
Pantser.
I know it says it's a seat of the pants. So plot in the writing world, there's plotter, people who plot, and pantsers. But I think you're a panther.
You think I am?
I don't know. I just love the. So questions about process.
So like I said earlier, I think research is one of the best ways to really avoid the writing. When I'm researching, I'm still writing. And I set a daily goal for myself. It's many of you might also want to do the 1,000 Words of Summer, which Jamie Attenberg sponsors, and that's the hashtag. It's bigger on Twitter. There's a Substack for it now. It's a fantastic community of folks who are just for 2 weeks during the summer holding each other accountable. And I think it's really important to have accountability partners. So each of my books, I've started with just that 1,000-word goal. And it was something I learned from a mentor at SIU in Carbondale, where I did my MFA. And so so whatever else I do in research, right? Whatever else I do in plotting, whatever else I do in character sketches, which I do a lot of also, I just write down every single thing I can possibly know about this character, their favorite color, their favorite food, their favorite smell. These things will not make it into my book, but I feel like I need to know what these are. I still do my 1,000 words a day. And that is painful when you're revising and it has to make 1,000 words of progress a day. So there are days when I cut the 800 words before and I start over, but I still have to make 1,000 words of progress on the manuscript. And I'm really strict about that. And sometimes I'm done with my 1,000-word goal by noon and my day is freed up for grading. And then some days I am, it's 11:30 at night and I am getting to the page. But it helps a great deal. Well, that is where I will say sometimes putting research in is great. I like to put placeholders in, things that I'm not sure that I'm going to use for later. I like to write different texts from different point of views of my characters. So one of the things in the Hive is there's a research report that Kate actually wrote about bed bugs. And I wrote it from Kate's point of view. She's researching bed bugs, and I write the entire report because I don't know how else to understand it unless I write it. And I didn't know it was going to make it into the final actual draft of the novel. And I did this with Flood, with my first book. I was writing sort of a parallel history of the mythology of Hannibal, Missouri versus the reality of the town. And I had no idea that that was going to make it into the final draft either. So I'm always writing different pieces, and I have to have some faith that they're going to go together. But I definitely am a pantser on the first draft. And that is so fun to me when things surprise me. There is an affair in the book, and I had no idea that was going to happen. I'm writing the scene. Grace is prepping. She's packing her bug out bags, and in walks someone else. And it was a really fun surprise. That's on the back of the book too, Amy. I'm not giving anything away.
All right. Oh, well, I read a PDF. I didn't see the back of the book. I was like, really? Okay. So back to the chat. Naomi asks, Melissa, once you begin a new chapter, is what happens in that chapter told through one voice, and is that the pattern you followed throughout? So having also written a multiple POV point of view manuscript, that's a really interesting question. Is like, what drives the chapters? Is it what you want the characters to say, or do you feel like the reader needs to expect a pattern?
Depends on which draft I'm in. I think a first draft is really about discovery. And I think draft 1.5, you are absolutely in charge. I don't believe in inspiration. I don't believe in, it's just work. Writing is work. And that's why it's sometimes really labor to do. Good news is I was raised to labor. And so this career fits my work ethic very well. So it really just depends. But I do a lot of rereading when I'm writing as well. So I like to set the scene on my desk the night before. So wherever I finish my writing, then I will make notes to myself. I'll even write myself a letter in my journal. Dear Melissa, tomorrow you're going to work on this. Don't forget about this. Write a little love note to myself. Get my favorite beverage ready. So nobody wants to write if they're just punishing themselves, or that voice in your head that's saying, I can't do this. It's too hard. This is all bad. No one's ever going to read it. That voice has no space in my office, and you're in my writing space right now because nobody wants to write for that guy. So I'm a big believer in sort of setting the scene for your writing, kind of like setting a date up. Like, I want to go on the date. I want to come to my desk the next day. So I do make a lot of notes to myself. I do a lot of reading, of course, when I'm writing as well. And if I get stuck, I will sometimes just go to a passage or an author that that I need. And I believe it's sometimes sort of spiritual. Like, I don't know which passage is going to speak to me and get me unlocked. So I have a lot of different ways to stay at my writing desk, to incentivize myself to do so. But I reread a lot before I go forward, and I rewrite a lot before I go forward. And this works really well for the first maybe 80 pages. And then you realize that you can't get your additional 1,000 words done that day if you reread 180 pages, right? So at some point, it's just a grind to the end of that first draft. And then the work starts.
So I have a question about rereading and editing your own work, because I think that sometimes you can get lost in a Word document. I've heard of tricks of printing out in a different font and going somewhere else to read. Do you do any tricks, or do you just stay with your Word document? And can you force yourself to just reread without tinkering? Are you magic? Are you magic?
I am pretty magical. I really am. But I tend to stay in the document. I tend to honor the process. I believe it's going to work out. There's enough good moments in the writing process to outweigh a lot of the doubt. I have an accountability. I have a writing partner, my friend Wendy Besselhan, who reads everything I write and tells me I'm amazing. and tells me when I'm not. She's very honest with me, but we've been working together for 10 years. And so I do have a partner that can help me get unstuck if I'm stuck. But I tend to stay in the same document. And Amy, you know this also. When I need to, I start what's called a beat sheet. Do you want to talk about the beat sheet, Amy?
Very much so. I meant to bring one down. Do you have one present? Like, all right, I'm gonna run upstairs. You can explain it, and I'm gonna get one to hold up.
Is it mine? It's got all my secrets on it. So Blake Snyder wrote a book called Save the Cat, and it's really his idea. He mapped narrative arcs for some of the most successful Hollywood films, and what he noticed was a pattern. And so once I have the plot points and see the pace of my story, I will add columns and on the chart for different things, for point of view, for theme, for tension, for each subsequent revision. And so the Save the Cat is basically, I think it's, Julia, you would know too, is it 11, 14? I can't remember the numbers. There's 14 different plot points that create pacing and tension within most good stories. And so what I'm trying to do once I figured out what the story is put pieces of the story, map pieces of the plot within that beat sheet. And then I start adding columns for point of view, and for different craft things that I need to pay attention to. And I go back to it. And that's what it looks. Hold
Can
it
you
back.
see it?
Yeah, hold it back a little, Amy. Hold it back. No, still can't. It really is. You know what? It looks better this way because it looks more magical. It is actually just a document with different
pages, but it forces you to look at the threads.
I think the first one for my first novel was 27 pages. And it really, for the Hive, it's longer because I had to make one for each point of view and for plots separately and then put them all back together. For me, it's a living, breathing document of my writer brain. It looks a bit like math, but it's a separate document that I keep all in Word than my actual manuscript. So they influence each other, but they do not intersect with each other.
So it has columns called chapter themes, issue, revision, beat. Yeah.
And the idea is that, oops, sorry, Amy.
No, you're the guru.
The idea, I have just learned this from failing enough. The idea is that each of the beats is something you want to hit within the plot for pacing and tension. And you can Google this and find Blake Snyder's Save the Cat beat sheet. It's not that profound, but it is incredibly useful if you work the tool.
Okay. Back to the chat. And if I keep looking away from you, that's because I'm trying to stay with the chat. And okay, so Leslie says, I love that setting is one of the 3 things you need to get going on in a novel. Any suggestions about how to create and use setting in the vast landscape of a novel? Because right, you could have a dishwasher that sings, right?
This is probably a better question for Leslie because her latest collection of short stories is set in DC and it comes out this fall. Someone put that in the chat because I am so excited about this book. I actually use the beat sheet also for setting. So for specifically, once I made a major plot decision that would affect the whole novel. So for example, The Hive is set in 2008 because I wanted to talk about the recession in Middle America. I wanted to talk about growing fear and resentment and Obama blame that really laid the foundation for the election that we had 8 years later, and the radicalism that we see today. And once I made that decision about setting, I needed a beat sheet for revision to see how the narrative arc might be affected by that time period. So I had an entire column, multiple columns for setting, so that I could understand how the setting was interacting with the plot. So how is each character affected by this? And in the Hive, the family business, the Feller family exterminating business is a bit of a character too. So I actually had to look at the Hive happens over a 12-month period and it's mapped by the Catholic calendar as well. So I had to actually look at how political decisions that were happening during the recession would have affected the family business structure. I feel like I just lost half the audience because I'm so in the weeds on this, Amy.
No, not at all. Not at all. I looked, so Zach has suggested to me that if I get rid of my blur, which I didn't even realize I had,
I think it looks super cool and spacey, Amy.
Thank you, but that way people could see the beat sheet. You know what? People can look up the beat sheet. Okay. Okay. Question about the beat sheet. Do you do the beat sheet before or after you draft? Before you draft, after the draft, while you draft?
I do it way after I draft. So it's usually, I would say maybe my second or third. It depends on how comfortable I am with the book and where it is, how many drafts I feel like it needs. No one really sees it in my drafts until I know what the book's about and I have a full draft. And then my agent will read it. Then Wendy will read it, but I don't really show it to anyone until I know what it's about first, which is difficult because we all want feedback and we all want to rush out with the first draft and ask someone, is it good? Do you like me? But I'm a person who really needs to keep that to myself so that I can stay in my head and so I can stay in the characters and live in that world before I share that world with readers.
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of the entire literary community and readers to say that we love you. But okay, so a question from Denise. Do you use an agent? And by the way, somebody has to leave the chat and wishes they could stay. This will be recorded and we'll be sending out a link to the record. It is recorded and we'll be sending out a link so you can get every word and relive this. Denise
Bye,
asks, do you use an agent? As an independent book publisher, does Turner do the marketing, promotion, and sales for your book, or do you do it yourself? And apologies if I've missed questions. You can throw them back in if you want me to try to get to them.
Alice also has a book called Famous Adopted People you should all read. That everyone just, I assume, is putting every book that I recommend in the chat somewhere. I have an agent. I have an agent who sold my first book and sold my second book, and I trust her very much. It's been a really amazing working relationship in my life. I think that a book's first hustle is always on the writer, and that's a lot of work. And it's not work that everyone wants to do. I have learned so much from hiring an independent publicist. Lauren Sarand is my independent publicist, and she is a magician in the publicity world. She just has taught me to think about how my book will reach readers and how it's a cooperative relationship with my publisher in a different way. I'm still learning, and we're launching a book in the middle of a pandemic, and it's a different skill set. We launched Furious Gravity last May in the middle, right as the pandemic began. And many of you probably don't know that I hesitated. The book was done. We had 50 amazing, many of the voices that are here today, 50 amazing writers, women writers in DC ready to launch this book. And it's gorgeous and I'm proud of it and I love it, love it, love it. But it was May and we didn't know how we were going to get this book to readers because everyone was figuring out what the world was going to look like. And that's a steep learning curve. This is the first one that I edited as well, and I can see many of those DC writers are in this audience too. I think you have to learn to pivot. You have to learn to expect the world to be different every day, and the thing you knew before and what was interesting in the book world yesterday may not exist the next day. And so I've learned to think about where people are and how to respond to that rather than relying on a model that might be a little bit stale in publicity. So we couldn't have imagined a year ago that we would be in a room with almost 100 people on screens. But in so many ways, this is more accessible than if I'd thrown a party at AU, right? Or Politics and Prose, where we had to try to figure out parking. That's our biggest concern at all moments when I put on events in DC is how are people going to park? Is it metro accessible? Can we get an interpreter? Is it accessible to multiple populations? And this is meeting readers where they are in a very different format. So I think publicity is something you're constantly adapting to. I wish I had a magic wand, but I don't have those kind of answers, but I've learned to trust more of the process and know that that there is a set of readers out there waiting for this book, and I just have to find them.
Well, it's an incredible book, and okay, so I've already said that. So as long as we're talking about the relationship between writers and readers, people want to support readers and writers want to support writers, especially during this incredibly difficult time to launch. What are the ways What are the concrete ways, are there concrete ways that readers can support you and other authors? What can we do other than buy the book, beyond buying the book?
Right. And if you buy the book, let me know, because I really do want to reach out and thank pre-orders drive so much of the book world. And they tell your local bookstores that the readers are interested in this book and they want to support it. Pre-orders are a huge way of signaling. And so if you do decide to pre-order the Hive, or if you pre-order any book, you should let the author know. They want to thank you. It's a part of being in a writing community.
Excuse me, how should people let the author know?
Oh, well, for me, you can go to thehivenovel.com. I mean, you just go to thehivenovel.com and you tell me, hey, I pre-ordered your book, and then I will write you a beautiful artist design postcard. These were actually made by one of my favorite book reviewers called Dust Jacket Reviews. And he actually draws these beautiful covers of your book. And he created postcards and he created these bookmarks as well. And what's so fun about these bookmarks is you can write on them. So, you can actually write in the spines of your book, and that way you can keep track of your books. I love the work he does. And it's just a great example of the way that readers and authors get to interact in the book world. So you can pre-order a book. Of course, I always recommend you go to your local independent bookstore. And if you don't know, or if you live in an area that doesn't have a local independent bookstore, because I grew up in rural Missouri where we didn't have access to independents. If you go to a bookshop, they'll pair you up with the closest bookstore to you, and you can order from them and keep those profits local. So you can always buy from the local independent bookstore. But if you don't want to buy a book and you tell your library to order the book, that's a huge way also to support writers, is go on to your local public library's website. There's a request form and you can just fill it out all day. And librarians love to hear from patrons. They will order any book that you want. All you have to do is fill out the form online, and they'll order the book for you, and then you can read it for free and support the author that way. Goodreads and is a huge part of the reading community too. So marking a book as to be read matters a lot. Amazon as well with reviews. All of these are just algorithms you're sort of trying to trick. The more attention it gets on those sites, the more attention Goodreads and Amazon actually puts toward the book. So that's a great way to actually support a writer. Bringing your book to a book club. Sharing the book on social media. Luckily, the Hive has the most beautiful cover. I'm so very excited by the work. And so you can share your book. You tell your friends. People read what their friends are reading. And so if you love a book by any author, tell your friends about it. That helps support the writer as well. And it's also just fun to talk about books. I love visiting book clubs. I love going to reading series or visiting classrooms. Those are my favorite things to do, because I've been a teacher for a lot longer than I've been a writer. And I love talking to people about books.
Is there, I'm just curious, so is there, if a book club wanted you to come and chat, is there a minimum number of people? Do they have to buy copies? How does that work?
I would appreciate if they buy copies and that they've read some of the book. So that we can talk about it. I've visited small book clubs. I visited large book clubs. I'm doing a really big book club that's in Florida this summer. That's a huge book club. So big or small doesn't necessarily matter to me. I'm just more interested in the discussion. What I find when authors come to book clubs, and I actually really enjoy this, is I'm just part of the discussion. They have questions sometimes, but they really just want to talk about the book. And so if I put the questions back to them, I actually learn a great deal about my own book that I didn't sometimes know before. I will learn things from a reader that I didn't even know I did in my own book. And that's really a lot of fun. That happened with my first novel. My character is in Jacksonville, Florida on the St. Johns River, and I write about the Mississippi River running backwards. My first book is this reimagining of Tom and Huck's famous Friendship is Female. And a reader in Jacksonville said to me, you wrote about two rivers that actually do run backwards, like the St. Johns River, and the Mississippi River only ran backwards for a few hours. And that's really brilliant. If only I had known that when I wrote the book. I must have known it somewhere in my brain, right, Amy? Like, you don't know what's in there. My parents actually live on the St. Johns River, so I'm sure somewhere in my brain that was possible. But I love that I learned that from a reader at a book club.
Surprise!
It was wonderful. It was really wonderful to see readers. I mean, once I do consider it a conversation, but once a reader has your book, it's theirs, and what they bring to the experience, right? And their own history makes it a different read. And so I think as a writer, your only answer is thank you for reading. That's full stop.
I'm going to ask you another question, and I would ask anybody who has a question that is way up higher in this chat, to which I didn't get, just throw it in again, because otherwise I'll just be going like this. Right now, you've said to me you're waiting, which I think is really interesting. You're waiting. So I'd love for you to explain what you mean by that, and also what you're doing while you're waiting.
I think we're all waiting. We're waiting for a pandemic that seems to keep going. We're waiting for the next big piece of news. We're waiting. I was waiting for one of my kids to get home from college. Like we're just all waiting all the time. But I think the only way to wait for a book to come out is to write. It's the only way I know to occupy my brain and put my anxiety somewhere. My anxiety, but also it's exciting to have a book coming out. It's really amazing. And there's so much that you can't control. And there's something really kind of freeing about just enjoying. I wrote this book, like here it is, it's done. I would like to revise it 10 more times, but my publisher tells me I can't. They eventually just take the book out of your hand and you're done. So to occupy myself, I just write another project. I am about 25,000 words into a new project, and I do not think I would be enjoying the Hive's publication as much if I were not deep into another book. And I think I always do this. I feel like I'm always sort of cheating on one book with the other. But that doesn't seem to be a bad thing. It seems to be a productive thing because I like to keep those ideas really secret for a while. I actually have a picture of me on my way to my first book launch at Left Bank Books in St. Louis, one of my favorite independent bookstores. And I walked by a table of my family members and we sat down and there's a napkin in front of me and I was writing on the napkin in front of me. So we just took a family picture, but when I zoomed in on it, I saw that the napkin in front of us, I had written, "Grace, is she a prepper?" And that was 5 years ago on the way to my first. So I'm on my way to read and debut my first novel, but I was already thinking about Grace. And so last January, I started writing new essays, thinking that I was writing them to help with the publicity process of the Hive, but I was really writing a very new book. So that's where I am right now, is writing.
All right, we have 4 minutes. I'm going to throw in 2 quick questions. Question from Mary. Did you have to do a lot of research on the history of the book? If so, how long did it take to compile all the historical information? And bump by Julia, repeating Claire's question, what does 1,000 words of progress look like when you're revising or researching? So 2 different questions, both about research. Go. Do you remember what they are?
They're about research. I'm just honestly, when I hear people's name, I'm like, that's Julia, and there's Mary, and love
right. Did you have to do a lot of research into the history of the book? How long did it take to compile it? And while you're researching, what does that 1,000 words a day look like?
So my 1,000 words a day, that answer is easy. My 1,000 words a day is always 1,000 words of progress on my current manuscript. So this morning I was at 29,100 on the new book. So tomorrow I have to be 1,000 words of progress, regardless of research, regardless of revision, regardless of what I cut. Now I'm realistic in that I don't know if June will be quite as productive, but right now I can balance teaching and writing and publicity right now. But there are days, there are times when I can't because the Hive is my project right now, right? You spend 5 years writing something, you want to give it your full attention and bring it into the world. So I mean 1,000 words of progress every single day. But I am doing a lot of research for the new book, which is interesting because some of it's personal research. And normally, because it's a nonfiction, it's called Dispatches from the Working Class. And so a lot of the essays that I'm writing, I actually just published one of the essays with LitHub. I don't know if Zach could put that in. He would be in.
That was great.
Thank you. It's called What Needs Done, The Love and Burden of a Family Business. And I did not realize when I was writing it that I was really writing toward my next project, and that the Hive and the next project really overlap. So some of the research I'm doing right now is more personal, right? And I've been doing that for years in trying to collect my own family stories, and I do it mostly through email. I do it through in-person interviews also, but it helps me a great deal when I'm interviewing different family members to get different perspectives individually and also via email. So I hear their voice in a different way. And I'm grateful my family likes to write to me or answer, and they like to answer my questions. I have always been, and I think most of us probably in this room who are writers know that writers have questions. We can be insistent. Some parents might call that annoying. I find it refreshing. I find it interesting, but I can understand that that drive to answer questions can be a bit overwhelming too. I have to live in this brain. I get it. I do. But I don't really know how to answer my own questions unless I'm writing it down or I'm poking at things. I'm pulling up the rocks and seeing what's underneath. I'm always fascinated by what people will tell me and by their own stories. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Julia or Mary. Julia says thumbs up. She's such
Right.
a big.
So I think that's a wrap. I do want to take a moment. I saw Tara Campbell threw a question in the chat. I just want to say Tara is a beloved board member of the Writer Center. I know that Margaret Melanie, our executive director, is here. Emily Holland, editor of Polar, and Zach and me, of course, your favorite banterers. Melissa, such a joy to talk to you. I mean, you're such a pillar of the DC writing community, and everybody's going to gush about you in the chat. So I'll just.
Oh, thank you, Amy. I'm a huge fan of yours and of your work, and also of the Writers Center and of Zach's first book. Zach, I'm waiting for your second book. Is the second book out? He doesn't want to unmute himself. But I love knowing that everybody is writing in this community and that everybody is incredibly supportive. When I look through the chat, I see everyone's name, and Alison Joseph has a new book out, and Tara writes like a new book a month. And so I look at so many of the names, and I'm so grateful for showing up, for sharing this space during a hard time, but really asking such thoughtful questions. It matters to me, and I'm super grateful.